What is going on, guys? Will Delval here, your host of the As We Go podcast, where we look at faith, we look at scripture, and we try to learn it together and apply it to our lives and tell others about it as we are going. Today, we are talking about something we all hate, we all try to avoid to the best of our abilities. It's something we just try and run away from, but I also think it's something that all of us have to deal with. All of us experience this in some way in our daily lives. Whether you follow Jesus, whether you are a part of another religion, or whether you don't subscribe to any following spiritual teaching or any religion at all, you probably still deal with this. Today, I want to talk about conflict. And maybe even now, as you hear the word conflict, you're already kind of shuddering like, ugh. This is what I try to avoid. I try in the best of my ability to avoid conflict. I don't want to have problems with anyone. I try to live a life where I don't, have to butt heads with anybody. But it's just not realistic that you go through life and never have some kind of altercation or some kind of issue with the people around you. Listen, we are all human. We all fall short of God's glory. We all have sinned, right? And if that's true, we all make mistakes. And in our mistakes, we naturally, we're going to have conflict every now and then. Whoa, breaking the fourth wall and jumping into my own episode. I'm here to tell you that the As We Go podcast has started a Patreon. We want to continue to grow this content and get the message out there. We want to up our quality and start having interviews and more dialogue with each other. To do that, we need some support. So will you consider giving to our Patreon? You can find it wherever links are. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any content. And now let's get back into the episode. But I think it's everyone's desire, whether you're a believer or not. We don't really want to stir the pot. Sure, you have people out there who say they like to poke the bear or they're a pot stirrer. But the reality is that's not true. We all try to avoid conflict. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. Conflict's not easy because usually there's someone who's offended you or you've offended someone. And it's never easy, whether you're the person bringing up the offense or you're the person listening to how you've offended others. It's never easy. But there's got to be a better way to deal with it. I feel like in life there's a few kinds of people. People who run into conflict. There's an issue at work, or there's an issue in the family, or an issue with some relationship you have. So you are in that moment, maybe you're a yelling family. You want to yell and just kind of get it out on the table quickly so you can deal with it. Where I kind of land, especially in my marriage, not in my other relationships, but in my marriage, I like to deal with it right when it happens. When I see that my wife is upset, I quickly try and go, hey, what's wrong? What's wrong? Because I really want to deal with it now. And she's more of a processor. She wants to think about it. She wants to see, hey, is my offense or being offended valid? Is this a me issue? Is this a Will issue? Is this a both issue? And so we tend to butt heads on me and my wife butt heads on the fact of how to deal with the conflict. I want to deal with it right then and there, and she needs time to process. So you have people who kind of want to run into conflict. You have other people who, hey, they don't really want to deal with conflict, but if they're in it and they have to address it, they're willing to. They don't necessarily want to, but they're willing to. And then you have the people over here who they legit will run from conflict. If they feel like they've offended you or if you offended them, they will create boundaries and try and stay away from you as much as possible. Or they'll love bomb you. They'll over communicate with you because they're trying to get a read if you're actually offended. See, for the longest time, I'd say most of my life, it's changed recently over the past few years, but for most of my life, I was an avoider. If I felt like I've offended you, or even if you offended me, I would either try to ignore you, and not in a rude way to make you think that I'm mad at you, but I would try to all scenarios to avoid bumping into you. And then I kind of became someone who did the love bombing thing, where I might have offended someone or they offended me, and to gauge the relationship, I would text them constantly. I would validate them, encourage them. I would text them constantly to make sure we were still good. And I actually kind of developed like a little bit of an OCD of trying to make sure the person knew, hey, I have no problem with you. I'm sorry if I offended you. I might not address the conflict at that time. I wouldn't necessarily address it, but I would try to make sure the person knew, hey, I just messed up. And I don't think any of those ways is the best way to handle it. I don't think running away from conflict is good. I don't think being like a bully and making conflict happen is the right way to do it. So what is the right way? You know, in John chapter 13, Jesus prays a prayer about the future of his church. He prays about the disciples to come, the disciples he had and the disciples to come. And in that, he prays in verse 34, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." I think what separates Christianity, what separates followers of Jesus, believers in Jesus, and those who hold to his teachings, the difference is we should handle division better than anyone, right? When there's an issue on the table, we should be able to deal with it together. You know, look at the world we live in. Look at politics. Look at just how we handle conflict anywhere in America. It seems so divisive. It doesn't seem like you can have a conversation with anyone. Before, colleges and universities were all about kind of exchanging ideas, and maybe you agree to disagree, or maybe you just disagree, or maybe you agree, but you can have a dialogue. But in this new world we live in, it seems like dialogue is happening less, but offense is going up. It's really easy to offend someone. Even when I started this podcast, as we started to get a little bit of traction, look at some of the comments, especially on the shorts. There's always like some kind of anger. There's people that have said that I'm not a real believer, or people think that I hate other religions, and that's just not necessarily true. That's just not true. It's not even necessarily, it's just not true. But we can't dialogue and exchange ideas anymore. And I think that's where we lost some of our love for each other, because the church should be different. The issue is that in the church, we've almost leaned into the division. Sunday mornings are one of the most divisive things, right? And this is about church. People who follow Jesus have kind of made pockets of camps of, hey, who they agree with, and they go to those people. So they're surrounded by people they agree with, and they're never challenged in their belief. But an issue with that is like, look, when we talk about church, when we talk about following Jesus, we're meant to be one church, one body, one group of followers going after Jesus together and making more disciples. But the issue is now we have so many denominations and creeds and clubs and pockets of Christianity, we don't look unified. But Jesus' prayer was that we would love one another, and that people would know that we follow Jesus, that we are his disciples with how we love one another. So I think this is a good moment to examine ourselves. When people see us, do they see us as people that love each other? When you experience a Sunday morning, where you experience a Bible study, when you walk into these worship spaces, these sacred spiritual places, are you just shocked at the supernatural, unbelievable love that believers have? I gotta be honest, sometimes I don't feel that. And it usually has to do with conflict, because what happens when we have conflict with other believers? Now, because there's a church on every street corner, and there's so many different churches, what we do is, when we have a conflict with someone, rather than working it out, rather than doing the uncomfortable thing, we get up and we go to a new church. And this happens all over, whether we go to that church or not. As believers, if I go to one church and you go to another, if we have a conflict, we should still deal with it, rather than just let bygones be bygones and never speak again. But what about just keeping the peace, right? What about making peace? In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, he goes through the different people that are blessed. And he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, and they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And listen to this one in verse 9. "Blessed are those who are peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Other translations say, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. That when we make peace, when there's an issue and we bring it together and we reconcile and bring it to peace, we are known as children of God, that we are known as followers of Jesus. Like really kind of wrap your mind around this. When we make peace where there is no peace, and when we love one another, we show that we are children of God and that we are true disciples of Jesus. So how we handle conflict will really determine and show people what we believe in and that Jesus is true and is who he says he is. But then why do we shy away from conflict so quickly? It's awkward. And listen, I'm not sitting here saying I have all the answers or I handle conflict perfectly. But I'm trying to live a life where I want to be a peacemaker, not only a peacekeeper. Track with me here, right? A lot of people will say, hey, don't bring up tough topics. Don't bring up issues because it will keep the peace. Everyone's laughing. Everyone's enjoying each other's company for the most part. Yes, there might be an underlying issue. There might be passive aggressive comments, but we can handle that because no one's coming to blows. No one is freaking out. And as long as we keep the peace, if we pretend nothing's wrong, everything will be okay. But that's not what the scripture says. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, meaning you see the issue, you've experienced the issue, you see the crap on the table, and you're saying, hey, let's clean this up and deal with it and make real peace. See, but what a lot of people do is they put a tablecloth over it. When the table's all scratched up and messy, they're just putting a tablecloth on it. I think it's the same way with a car. Have you ever been driving in a car and something goes wrong, you hear like a rattling sound? What I used to do, I would just turn up the music. So then I wouldn't hear the rattling sound and everything was good. But the reality is something was still wrong with the car. When there was an issue, there was a rattling noise, turning up the music made me feel better, but it didn't solve the issue. And eventually the car would break down. And the same thing happens in our relationships. If we don't deal with the noise, the issue that's buzzing around, the car eventually will stop. The relationship at some point will suffer. So how do we handle conflict? Thankfully, at least as believers, and I think that even unbelievers can benefit from this model, this method of dealing with conflict. Thankfully, Jesus himself explained how we should handle conflict in the church. And I think that we can apply this to areas in our lives, not just even in church, but with friendships in general and in the workplace or on the soccer field or wherever. In Matthew chapter 18, this is kind of known as the conflict chapter. And this is what it says in verse 15 of Matthew 18. It says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen to even the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So let's break this down. He first says, if your brother sins against you, and it doesn't just mean male issues, right? This is talking about if someone who is in the fold, if someone who's in your church or belongs to just the big C church, not just your local church, if your brother, your friend, your relationship, whoever you are dealing with, a family member or a coworker, if they sin against you, right? They do something that was wrong. Go and tell him or her his fault. So it doesn't just say, hey, if they wrong you, forgive. We should forgive. But it first says, if someone sins against you, go and tell them what wrong they did. And here's the thing, right? Here's the issue with it. He goes on the next verse and says, between you and that person alone, right? That if there's an issue, you take whatever that issue is, you go to the person and you tell them, hey, when you did this, it really rubbed me the wrong way, or it was hurtful, or hey, I don't understand, but I'm feeling some type of way. Can we talk about this? And it says, go to that person alone. But let me tell you what happens, especially even in church. What we do is we use this caveat of seeking wise counsel. which is good, seeking advice on how to deal with things. But I have to ask, are we actually seeking wise counsel, or are we just looking for someone to complain to and talk about it? See, you can kind of tell when you go to a friend or you go to somebody who's not in the situation and you begin to tell them, hey, this person wronged me, they did this, and this, and you have no intention of actually bringing it up to the person. Even if they say, hey, maybe you should go to that person, you have no intention of bringing it up to the person. Thus, you're just gossiping. You're just airing your grievances out with the wrong person. And this happens in church culture a lot. We'll say, hey, can you pray about the situation I'm in? So-and-so did bop, 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 bop. Or, hey, I want to let you know that person did this, or that their name comes up, and you're like, oh man, let me tell you what that person did. But meanwhile, the person might not even know they've offended you. Or maybe they're trying to keep the peace too and hoping that you never bring it up. But meanwhile, you're both telling other people. Sorry. So what happens when you do that is you are now building camps. And now someone who had nothing to do with the issue is starting to get a little bit of bitterness to the person that wronged you. Even if the offense wasn't at them, they want to defend you, they want to be there for you, they want to support you. So now they're mad. And sometimes what happens is they get more angry or they get more bitter than even you are. So even if you and that friend reconcile, because of all the gossiping happening in the different circles, now there's issues all over the table. And people have issues with someone they never were supposed to. And that all was because you didn't keep it within the boundary. See, when someone wrongs us or we wrong someone and we want to apologize or we want to seek forgiveness or we want to extend forgiveness, the best thing to do is bring it directly to the person. The stats are probably out there, but I'd argue, if I was a betting man, I'd put money down on, I bet most of our conflict can be resolved if the person who was offended goes to the person who did the offending and they have a conversation about it. If Christians, if believers can truly be people who are slow to speak and quick to get angry, or slow to speak, slow to get angry, and quick to listen, so much problems can be solved. But I'm just going to be honest. As humans, as people, we are not quick to listen. When someone's speaking, we're just sitting there thinking of our rebuttals. We're sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, I'm going to say this. And then what happens? Or you're listening, but you're not really listening. You're just thinking of the rebuttals, you're thinking what to say, and maybe you're speechless. And what happens is on the car ride home, you're like, man, I should have said this and that they did this and this did this to me. But that's when you call the person and say, hey, you know what? I haven't finished processing this. Can we talk again? We don't do that. We get bitter. In Ephesians 4:31, it says this. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Let me read that again. Ephesians 4, verse 31. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. That if you have an issue with someone, rather than getting bitter, rather than getting angry, rather than letting wrath build up, that you start slandering the person, you start talking behind their back about how not good they are. What if you went to that person and dealt with the conflict one-on-one? But to do that, it's not just one person listening and one person speaking. It's a dialogue where one person speaks and the other listens, but then you have to allow ample time for that person to then to speak and for you to listen. But we don't do that. We talk to others. So let me encourage you today. If you have a conflict with someone, if you have an issue, go directly to that person. I learned, over the past few years, there have been some conflicts that I have been in. I'm human. I fail. I mess up. There's people I've offended, and there's people that offended me. And a few years ago, one of the things I regret, and thankfully is over, and me and the person reconciled, is we had a conflict. It was in 2020. Times were hard, and conflict arose. And you know what? I wanted to think that I had this righteous anger, and I didn't. I used my words carelessly. right? Remember we talked about before, words have power. I used my words carelessly and it offended someone. Now, they use their words carelessly back and then end up offending me. And we talked about it with other people. We didn't directly go to each other, but then eventually we did go to each other and we reconciled. Now, do we have, actually, I'd say the friendship's pretty good. It wasn't what it was, but I think now it's more genuine. And even though maybe we have different boundaries now, we have genuine care for each other. And stuff like that has given me real hope. And it actually taught me how to deal with conflict. That rather than just get angry on my own, I should just go directly to the person. You know what? In that situation, that person actually called me. And I'm so thankful they did that. I'm very thankful they did that because I was harboring bitterness. But once they approached me, I was able to put it all on the table, and so were they, and we reconciled. And I'm very thankful for that. Anytime we see each other, we're just so excited to see each other because we've put that childish stuff behind us. So deal with it one-on-one. Now, what if that person did something really wrong? Listen, reconciling doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries. Luckily, in my situation, we were able to figure this out and there's no real big boundaries. But there are situations where someone might wrong you or you might wrong someone. And the natural thing is to have some boundaries. You can forgive each other. You can still have love for each other. But the relationship might change a little bit because, walls get built. And sometimes walls are not always bad. There might be boundaries because there's temptation to keep headbutting, keep going to blows. So if you are in a conflict with someone and they've really wronged you to the point of safety or harm, or maybe just the hurt was just too deep, you can reconcile, but not necessarily have to hang out and eat a meal together every day. But you can share in the most important meal, which is communion. That you can love each other and pray blessing on each other and hope for each other's best, that God does the best in your life and blesses you. See, that's real reconciliation where you don't have your hand on the person's throat anymore emotionally, but you're willing to let it go and pray blessing over them. So let's keep going in the verse. If your brother listens to you, then you gain your brother back. You gain that relationship back. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So say someone wrongs you, you guys go together and you cannot reconcile. You guys are just continuing to argue. It says, bring 2 or 3 more people, come together and kind of explain it. And now the people that are around you should be godly people, and people who love you and understand the situation are going to help you process. They're not taking sides. They're helping you process the conflict. So you come together and you say, hey, this is kind of how they've offended me. This is how I was offended. And the person also says, this is how I offended or perceived that they offended me or how I'm offended. And you come together, you lay it out on the table, and together you talk about it. And then you're able to reconcile and see like, hey, this is where you were wrong. This is where you were wrong. Can we apologize? Can we really own our sin and deal with it? See, the key to reconciling conflict is to own your part of it. In every conflict, there's 2 people at least, and in every side, both have to own something in the conflict. It's never, I'm telling you, it's never one-sided. There might be bigger issues on one side than the other, but both can be hurtful, both can offend, and both can be offended. So what you want to do is you want to air it out and own your part. You want to own 100% of your part. So if you've only offended the person 20% and they've offended you 70%, you own 100% of your 20. So that's, maybe I did the math wrong there, but you know what I mean. If you offended someone 50%, half the problem is you own 100% of your 50%, and they should own 100% of their 50%. And if you both own it, if you both apologize for your percentage and apologize well, you can reconcile. See, what happens is we like to, and I can be known for this too, but maybe I'm just talking to myself, where I might apologize for something, but I don't explain what I'm apologizing for, like a blanket statement. There's sometimes where me and my wife might be arguing or we have an issue arise, and I'm quick to just say, I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for everything. And then she has to be like, do you know what you're sorry for? And I'm like, you know what? I don't. I want to get rid of this awkwardness so fast. I'm quick to just say sorry. See, but if someone's deeply hurt, the blanket sorry doesn't cover the offense. If the wound is huge and needs stitches, and you say, hey, I'm so sorry I hurt you, here's a Band-Aid, it's not going to help the wound. But if you say, hey, I really offended you, let me help stitch it back together, that's when you start doing some healing. So if you are in a conflict, own your part. And if you can't, get 2 or 3 people and bring it together. Now, this is the part where I've never really seen happen too much. If they refuse to listen to you, take it to the church. That if you guys are both in the body, if you both believe in Jesus, hey, get some elders together and talk about, hey, this is what we're dealing with. We want to love each other, but we cannot reconcile. And seek good counsel from people who are steeped in scripture and bring the offense together so you can reconcile. But what happens if you do all of these things? Say someone's offended you, you've gone to the conflict, you've gone to them one-on-one, didn't work. You've brought 2 or 3 people, didn't work. Let me tell you, if you just did the first 2, you will probably reconcile. Sadly, most people do not do the first 2. They gossip, they talk about it, and they never address it one-on-one. And it's very rare they address it with some close friends to actually solve the issue. Rather, they just tell close friends and they never deal with it together. But say you are bold enough to deal with the uncomfortableness and actually deal with it, you could have a stronger, better relationship. I'm telling you, if you lean into the conflict, not as a bully, but as someone with an open heart and open mind to hear and listen, you will gain a relationship back that'll be better than what you had and where you left it. But say they refuse to even go to the church. They just don't want to reconcile. This is what it says. If he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Now, how do we deal with tax collectors, right? So think about it. A lot of people read this as, hey, we should treat them as a dirty sinner and just avoid them and not stay away from them. Let me throw this at you. How did Jesus deal with tax collectors? See, the author of this gospel, Matthew, was a tax collector. How did Jesus treat him? He loved him, he forgave him, and he allowed him to follow him. Jesus treated tax collectors and Gentiles with love, unconditional love, and he called them to himself. He called them to a relationship with God. So meaning we pray for them, we show them the love of God, and we hope that one day we'll be reconciled again. So when it says, hey, if they don't listen to you, they don't listen to your friends, and they don't listen to the church, pray for them, love them well, and pray that their eyes will be open to the wonder of the gospel and to the wonder of Jesus and his love. Conflict is going to happen. I promise you, you're going to go through this life and you are going to deal with conflict. It's just going to happen. If you are really being honest, you're going to deal with conflict. But be honest, deal with it together. Listen, I have friends that we have conflict. We don't agree on a lot of things. It seems like there's little we do agree on, but somehow the relationships are strong because we're quick to deal with it with each other. And we do pray the best for each other. So what conflict are you in? What prayer needs to happen? And how do you reconcile with that person?